The night sky was calm above Earth, stars shining quietly. Yet far beyond that calm stretched a story of broken kingdoms and wandering survivors. They were called Outcasts, men and women who had once carried banners of glory and power among the stars. But now their banners were torn, their fleets crushed, and their worlds turned into ashes. No one had wanted them, no home had welcomed them. Only Earth was left as a chance, a place where the end could become a beginning. The leader of these wanderers was Queen Regina. She was young, but her eyes showed the weight of storms carried over long years. Her robe was gone, replaced by armor scratched by 100 battles. She led not by comfort, but by fire. Next to her stood the warriors who had followed her through ruin. Alan, the sharp thinker who kept his calm in any fight. Marcus, who carried a strength like a mountain. Daniel, whose speed in combat had saved them more than once. Victor, a silent figure who struck fear into those who faced him, and Luke, who never allowed his courage to fail. No matter how deep the shadow grew, they were survivors more than rulers, fighters more than dreamers. Yet behind their grit lived a devotion that would not die. Their people were scattered and few, but wherever Queen Regina walked, hope seemed to rise like a flame never fully smothered. When their ships came close to Earth, they felt both fear and wonder. The planet was not mighty or proud compared to other places they had known. From their view, it was blue seas, green plains, white clouds, and small lights glowing in the darkness of night. To many this seemed weak, a world with no empire, no powerful warships, no armies in the sky. But this apparent weakness gave the wanderers their only true chance. Regina stood on the command deck of their leading ship, her gaze locked on the planet. She held her worn helmet in her hand, ran her fingers across the dents in the metal, and spoke quietly to those near her. She said that Earth was not to be claimed in conquest. It was to be a partner or nothing. For if they forced their way onto this world, they would become no different than their enemies. And she swore never to repeat the mistakes that had destroyed their home among the stars. Alan frowned, resting his hand on the table before him. He said that Earth's people might not understand. They might see strangers landing and believe armies of destruction had come. Marcus grunted and told him that survival left no place for waiting. There was no choice. Earth had to see them as allies or war would come quickly. Daniel smirked thinly and said war was the one thing they knew well. Still, Luke cut through the moment with a steadier voice, saying that if Earth really was their last hope, then trust had to be the first weapon drawn. The Queen agreed. A ruler could lead through fire, yet peace could never exist without trust. She asked all of them a single question. Would they stand beside her and promise, even if Earth rejected them at first, that they would not burn this world down? When their ships descended lower, blinding streaks of light chased across the skies, witnessed by millions below. Farmers looked up from their fields in silence. Soldiers in hidden bases shouted in alarm. Children pressed their faces against windows, watching the night blaze bright. Governments quickly sent orders commanding fighters to stand ready. Many feared it was the start of a new invasion. The wanderers did not fire on anyone. Their ships stayed in orbit, still and patient, shining like heavy shadows against the stars. From space, Queen Regina stood tall beside her captains and thought about what she must do next. The last kingdom of her people carried no golden crown, no vast fleet, no unbroken army. All it had was steel, courage, and the desperate wish to survive with honor. She whispered to herself that Earth was their last hope, and with those words, she made her choice. The Outcasts would not take, they would ask. Their battle would begin first with a plea for brothers, not servants. Whether Earth answered with war or with welcome would decide if their journey ended in ruin or in glory. The first days after the arrival of the Outcasts were filled with tension across Earth. People everywhere talked about the great lights that had burned across the night sky. News outlets showed long trails of fire that had streaked over continents. Fear spread quickly, and in every city, there were whispers that an invasion had begun. Soldiers were made ready, warplanes filled the skies, and hidden missile systems were armed. Earth believed that destruction was moments away. In the halls of power, leaders argued in panic. Some wanted to strike first and show no mercy. Others said patience was needed. At the center of the storm stood Captain Laura, a sharp-minded officer who had seen her share of combat. She watched the still silent ships in orbit and said that no enemy would arrive with such patience. She believed they had come not as conquerors, but as exiles searching for shelter. General Harris disagreed. He was older, cautious, and had seen enemies deceive before. He reminded them that weakness often leads to downfall, that kindness shown at the wrong hour could destroy them all. Yet he also knew that Earth was not prepared for such wars above the skies. Fighters of Earth were brave, but humanity had never faced armies beyond their world. As arguments arose, the Outcasts sent their first message. It was simple and clear. Queen Regina herself appeared on the screens of every command center. She made no threats, and she carried no crown upon her head. Standing in her battle armor, she spoke with calm honesty. She said her kingdom was gone, her fleets destroyed, her cities burned. She and her people had escaped with their lives alone. They sought no throne on earth, no riches, and no chains to bind anyone. They sought only one thing, a chance to live and fight side by side for survival against the darkness that hunted them. For a long moment, no one in the command hall spoke. Even the air seemed heavy with silence. Finally, strategist Ethan, a man known less for pride and more for practical truths, leaned forward and said that her words carried weight. He believed her tone was honest. Her eyes carried the burden of truth. He reminded the council that if these wanderers spoke truth, the danger that erased their worlds might soon come here as well. If Earth turned away, then when that danger arrived, humanity would stand alone. The choice pressed on every leader like a stone on the chest. Strike first and risk war with those who had made no move against them, or trust strangers from the stars and open themselves to danger of betrayal. Meanwhile, on the ships above, the warriors grew restless. Marcus paced the halls of steel and said men on Earth would never believe them. Daniel sharpened his blade again and again, saying that soon they would be forced to show their strength. Victor kept near silence, only gripping the hilt of his weapon with steady patience. Luke told them that if Earth rejected them, then they would still fight to shield this planet. For it was better to die in a final stand than to drift without purpose forever. Queen Regina listened to all of them, but showed only steady calm. She repeated that their fate was not only in the skies, but also in the halls of men and women below. Earth would not be won by fire. It would be won, or lost, by trust. Last, Captain Laura looked around the chamber and spoke firmly. She said Earth had stood for thousands of years because its people believed in rising when storms came. She argued that this was the greatest storm of all. If these warriors told the truth, Earth's choice was not between danger and safety. The choice was between standing alone against the night or standing together with new brothers and sisters. Her words carried through the silence, and at last General Harris nodded. Ethan's steady logic and Laura's bold spirit found ground together. The decision was made. Earth would not strike. Orders were sent to the skies. Weapons stood down. Warplanes returned to their bases. Missiles powered off. A message was sent upward to the still ships that circled the planet. Earth was willing to meet, willing to speak, willing to see if trust could be born. When that message reached Queen Regina, she finally allowed herself a single breath of relief. Her warriors looked at her, waiting for her call. With measured words, she said that the first step had been taken. Now the true test would begin. What happened in the coming days would decide if Earth became ashes, or if it rose to hold the future in its hands. The meeting between the people of Earth and the Outcasts was set in a secure base hidden under mountains. The leaders of Earth wanted caution, while Queen Regina wanted respect. Soldiers lined the halls with weapons ready, each of them tense, their eyes fixed on the armored figures that walked beside their queen. The warriors Alan, Marcus, Daniel, Victor, and Luke were not dressed as diplomats. They carried the weight of fighters who had seen battle after battle, scars on their faces, and armor darkened by fire. When Queen Regina entered that hall, she carried no crown, only her sword at her side. Captain Laura was waiting there with Ethan and General Harris. The room was filled with tension as sharp as any blade. Regina spoke first. Her voice was steady, calm, and clear. She said that her people had nothing left but their spirit and their skill, and she offered those to Earth. She said her warriors could train Earth's soldiers, pass on knowledge of wars fought in the vastness of space. She said her people would give sweat, steel, and loyalty if Earth gave them trust in return. General Harris leaned forward at the table. He asked why they should trust strangers who had already been part of wars that ended in ruin. Regina raised her gaze without fear. She answered that ruin had not broken them. It had taught them. She said survival was not given. It was carried by those who refused to bow down. Ethan watched her closely. He saw no sign of trickery in her words. He spoke up and said new skills and new unity were worth more than suspicion. Still the leaders argued. Some soldiers in the room whispered that the queen and her warriors were dangerous and would one day turn against them. Regina then motioned for Alan to step forward. Alan said that victory is never found by standing still. He described battles fought without sleep, trenches filled with ash, and comrades who had chosen death over surrender. His voice was sharp but steady, and even the hardest soldiers listened. Then Marcus spoke, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He said his strength had once defended cities larger than any on Earth. And though those cities were gone, he still carried the will to fight for every stone and every person willing to resist. Daniel stepped forward, quick and lean. He spoke boldly, saying that no war was won by strength alone, that speed, a sharp mind, and sudden strikes turned the tide. He promised he could teach Earth's pilots and fighters how to battle with more than fear. Victor said little, but when he spoke, his words cut through the room. He told them that silence and patience could take down enemies far larger than any army, that one man could be the edge between victory and defeat if trained the right way. Finally, Luke said that all of this mattered only if trust bound it together. He reminded everyone that Earth had one chance to grow stronger, and turning against one another would kill that chance faster than any enemy fleet. The room fell silent. Captain Laura rose and told her fellow leaders that these men spoke like true warriors and not liars. She said Earth had always grown stronger when people came together, from old wars to the present. She told them that fear was natural, but courage meant choosing the dangerous path. If it led to survival, General Harris leaned back in his chair, and though he was still cautious, he agreed that training Earth soldiers could be the difference between life and destruction. At last a decision was made. Earth would accept the help of Queen Regina and her warriors. For the first time since their arrival, Regina lowered her head slightly in respect. She said they would prove themselves not by words but by action, in the training grounds and the battlefields to come. Within weeks, camps and bases across the world began to fill with new energy. Regina's warriors spread across these places, teaching men and women alike. Alan brought discipline like stone. Marcus tore through training exercises with raw strength and demanded more from every recruit. Daniel drilled speed and reflex into young soldiers. Victor taught stealth and the art of striking unseen, while Luke inspired many by reminding them not to break under pressure. At night, in those camps, fires burned and songs rose, not in celebration, but in defiance. Men and women of Earth were changing. They were no longer preparing for wars of their own land alone. They were preparing to guard not only Earth, but a future beyond it. Queen Regina stood among them, watching with pride. For the first time in many years, she began to believe survival was not only possible, but that victory might one day be theirs. The Outcasts were no longer only wanderers. They were builders of a bond that could turn Earth into something no power in the stars had ever expected. A house of warriors who would never surrender. The skies above Earth began to change. For many weeks, training had filled the camps and the bases, but the day of testing finally arrived. Great shadows appeared far above the world. Entire fleets of warships cut across the stars, black against the glow of the sun and moon. Across every city, men and women lifted their eyes. First came whispers, then came shouts. Soon the entire planet understood. The enemy had followed Queen Regina and her warriors to Earth. Sirens wailed from coast to coast. Armies rushed to their posts. The world had lived in fear of this day, and now it had come. Yet this time, it was not the same Earth. It was an Earth awakened. Soldiers who had been trained by Alan, Marcus, Daniel, Victor, and Luke no longer stood in confusion. They stood with sharpened blades, stronger arms, and a discipline the world had never known before. In the command hall, Queen Regina stood beside Captain Laura, General Harris, and Ethan. The screens lit up with images of the enemy descending. The generals of Earth looked uneasy. Harris clenched his fists tighter than before, but his voice was steady as he admitted that no normal Earth army could have stood against such a fleet alone. Yet he also said that Earth was no longer alone. He looked toward Regina and her warriors and nodded firmly. Alan stepped forward. He studied the projections and quickly explained where to strike. He said their carriers must rise to meet the attackers before they landed, and if they fell, the cities below would burn. Marcus added with a deep voice that ground forces had to form layered defenses, not scattered ones.
Help.
Daniel called for waves of aircraft to move with speed, using the tactics he had drilled into every pilot until they sweated and nearly collapsed. Victor said nothing for a moment, then pointed out weak points in the enemy formations and showed how smaller squads could slip through to do heavy damage. Finally, Luke turned to the soldiers around the hall. He reminded them all that fear was a chain and strength was a choice. He said they had chosen to fight, and there was no turning back now. The defenders of Earth rose together, and the first battles erupted in the skies. Great thunder rolled as fighters sped upward to meet the enemy. Explosions shone like stars being born and dying in the same breath. From the ground, citizens watched giant ships burn across the heavens like falling meteors. On board one carrier, high in the clouds, Queen Regina herself led the charge. She refused to sit back in safety. Sword in hand, she directed strikes and gave courage to her warriors. At her side, Marcus clashed shoulder to shoulder with armored soldiers who boarded their ship. His strength crushed into them like a storm. Alan guided defense cannons with quick thinking and clear commands, striking enemy craft before they could pierce the hull. Daniel led squads through narrow halls, moving faster than thought and driving enemies back step by step. Victor slipped silently from shadow to shadow, clearing routes that other fighters did not even realize were blocked. Luke stood in the heart of the carrier, shouting words that rallied every soldier to stand again and again, no matter how many times they were struck down. All across Earth, the battles raged. Jets filled the skies, tanks thundered across plains, and infantry beside the new warriors of the Queen pushed forward where fear once held them back. From the oceans rose carriers that launched steel storms straight into enemy fleets. The fight was brutal. Entire squadrons of Earth's defenders were lost. Entire units vanished beneath the fire. Yet still they pushed forward. For the first time in countless years, Queen Regina's old enemies were forced backward. Their fleets cracked under the relentless defense of a people who refused to kneel. Night fell, and Earth still stood. Great wrecks of burning ships drifted in the atmosphere. Soldiers on the ground looked upward, exhausted, holding their weapons in silence. And then a shout rose. Cheer crossed the camps, echoed by more voices until the sound rolled across bases and cities. Against all fear, Earth had dealt the enemy a wound. Regina stood on the broken deck of the carrier that had carried her through fire. She looked upon her warriors and upon Earth's soldiers who had fought with them. She knew this was only the beginning.
Oh.
More battles would come, greater than this. But one truth had been proven. Together, the Outcasts and Earth were stronger than anyone had believed. She raised her blade high, and her warriors raised theirs, and the soldiers of Earth lifted their rifles into the smoke-filled sky. For one moment, there was no divide between her people and the people of Earth. They were one army, standing as protectors of their last hope. The universe that had once cast them out was about to learn what it meant to fight a world that had decided never to submit. The morning after the great battle was silent in many places, yet the silence was not peace. Across the broken fields smoldered wreckage from fallen machines. In the oceans rested the burned remains of warships, slowly sinking beneath the water. On the ground, soldiers walked among the ruins, carrying the wounded and gathering those who had fallen. Earth had won its first battle, but everyone knew the war was not over. Queen Regina stood with her warriors on the deck of a battered base near the coast.
Ow.
She looked out over the horizon while the sun climbed high. Her armor was cracked and scorched, her sword marked with blood and smoke, but she held her head high. Alan stood beside her, his sharp eyes studying every column of smoke. Marcus carried his massive weapon on his back, his arms crossed in thought. Daniel sharpened his blade once more, determined to be ready. Victor whispered short orders to scouts near him. Luke stood with fresh bandages on his arm, but his voice remained strong as he encouraged the tired soldiers around him. Captain Laura approached the queen. Her uniform was also marked by battle. She saluted, not just in respect, but in recognition that the fight had forged something new. She admitted that when Regina first arrived, she had doubts. Now she said those doubts were gone. She said that Earth had stood because of trust, and that trust had to remain if they were to face the storms to come. General Harris joined them, slower in his step, but firm in his stance. He said the battle showed that Earth could bleed, but would not break. He admitted he had been cautious, sometimes too cautious, but even he could not deny the will of a planet that had fought with every ounce of strength. Ethan spoke as well, his voice clear and calm. He said Earth was no longer an isolated world. From this day on, Earth had become a sword in the hands of both mankind and the outcasts. Regina listened and then raised her voice so that every soldier within hearing could understand. She said that Earth was no longer just a home for those who had been cast out. It had become a foundation, the root of something greater. She swore her people would no longer be wanderers. They were now bound with the sons and daughters of Earth. She raised her sword and declared that together they would not only defend this planet, but also bring light to the endless night that had hunted them. Soldiers, both her own and those of Earth, lifted their weapons as her words echoed through the camp. A cheer thundered, louder than the drums of war. Hope filled the air where moments before there had only been smoke and ash. In the weeks that followed, the training never stopped. The wrecks were rebuilt into stronger ships. The fallen were honored and the wounded healed. New bases rose on mountains and near coasts. Farmers and citizens watched as soldiers marched, stronger now, while young men and women stepped forward to join the ranks. Alan worked with commanders to shape faster strategies. Marcus pushed builders to create weapons heavier and more powerful. Daniel trained young pilots to strike with speed. Victor built networks of spies and scouts to keep watch for threats. Luke moved from camp to camp, lifting every spirit he touched with his unbreakable optimism. The message of Earth's stand traveled far. Across distant worlds and broken outposts, whispers spread that Earth had fought back the tide. The story of outcasts, who found their last hope on Earth, became a call to many. Men and women who had thought they were alone began to believe in strength again. Yet Regina never allowed anyone to forget the truth. She said the enemy was not defeated forever. They had been wounded, but they would rise again. The coming battles would be harder, but the victory Earth had won proved that they were not powerless. For the first time in many years, she could speak with certainty. She stood before her people and told them that survival was no longer just a dream. It was a promise. On a clear evening, she and her warriors looked up at the sky. The stars burned quietly, but to them, it was no longer an endless void. It was a horizon, waiting for reach. Earth had stood, Earth had fought, and Earth had risen beyond what anyone expected. The outcasts were no longer broken wanderers. With Earth, they had become defenders of something far greater than themselves. They had become the last hope, and with that hope, they were ready to fight not only for survival, but for victory. Queen Regina smiled at that thought, her hand firm on the hilt of her sword. Whatever came next, Earth would face it unbroken.